Hello and welcome to my Beginner's Guide to Music Theory. This is intended for anybody who's brand new to music theory or anyone who maybe knows a little bit about chords or scales, but is still just a little bit confused about how it all fits together. This guide will not be using any music notation, so you don't need to know how to read music, and it'll just be using the keyboard, so you can follow along on your own keyboard, or you can simply just watch and learn and apply these concepts to whatever instrument you play. And since we're going to be talking about these concepts on the keyboard, the first thing to start out with is the names of the notes on the keyboard. And if we take a look at the keyboard, we can see that there's a bunch of white keys and some black keys in between some of the white keys. And these repeat in a pattern that go all the way up and all the way down the keyboard, regardless of how big or small your keyboard is. To identify the pattern, we usually look at the black keys, and we can see that we have this repeating pattern of 2 black keys, and then 3 black keys. And it keeps going all the way up and down, 2, and then 3, 2, and then 3. And the first note that we identify in this pattern is the one to the left of the 2 black keys. That's this note right here. And that is a C. And you'll see soon when we get into major scales why we typically start with this note. And then from here, going up the keyboard, we typically just go through the alphabet. So C, D, E, F, G. And then at this point, we actually go back to the beginning of the alphabet. A, B, and then C again. And you can see this C is to the left of the 2 black keys, just like this C. And you can hear that they sound very similar, just higher and lower. And that's because they're both a C note, just in different octaves. And when we talk about this interval, this is an octave. And it goes all the way up and down the keyboard. Those are all C notes, just in different octaves. Now, the way we name the black keys is a little bit different, and that's because each black key actually has 2 different names, and which name we use depends on either what key we're in or what scale we're using. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what you need to know for now is that each black key has a sharp name and a flat name. Sharp just means that it's above a note, and flat means that it's below a note. So in this case, this note is above the C, so it's C sharp. It's also below the D, so it's also D flat. So the 2 different names for this note are C sharp and D flat. Even though it's the same note, it's just 2 different names for that one note. And then going up from there, this note is above D, so it's D sharp, but it's also below E, so it's also E flat. So again, 2 different names for that one single note. And then going up from there, this note is F sharp as well as G flat. This note is G sharp as well as A flat. And then this note is A sharp as well as B flat. Okay, now that we know the note names, we can start putting them together to create scales. Now, a scale is just a group of notes that sound good together. And the first scale we normally talk about in music theory is the major scale. And that's because it's a very, very commonly used scale all across popular music. And it sounds like this. And you can hear it has a really simple, pleasing, easy to listen to sound. And as you saw, I started on this C, and I played all the white notes up to this C. And together, all those notes created a C major scale. Now, this scale is made up of a pattern that we can use starting on any note on the keyboard. So let's talk briefly about what that pattern is. Now, we'll be talking about intervals in a little bit, but what you need to know for now is an interval is simply just the distance from one note to another note. And the smallest possible interval that we have here is called a half step. And we can think of a major scale as being a pattern of half steps. So if we take a look at the C major scale, we can see starting from C going to D, this is going up 2 half steps. And then same thing from D to E, we're going up 2 half steps. From there, we only go up 1 half step from E to F, but then we're back to 2 half steps from F to G. And then G to A is also 2 half steps. A to B is also 2 half steps. And then 1 half step up to the C at the very end here. So if we look at this pattern of half steps across the major scale, we can see that we have 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And this is a pattern that we can use starting on any note on the keyboard to create a major scale. So let's go ahead and use this pattern to create another major scale starting on a different note. And let's just go 1 note up from C, which is either C sharp or D flat. Now remember earlier I said this would be either C sharp or D flat, depending on what key or what scale we're using. In this case, it's D flat, and you'll see soon why it's D flat. But let's just start by spelling out this major scale. So from D flat, going up 2 half steps, we have E flat, 2 more half steps to F, 1 half step to G flat, 2 half steps to A flat, 2 half steps to B flat, 2 half steps to C, and then 1 half step back to D flat. And we can see that has the same pleasing, happy sound as the C major scale. It's simply just starting on a different note. Now, the reason that this is a D flat major scale instead of a C sharp major scale is because we would run into some funny note names if this was a C sharp major scale. And I'll go ahead and show you. So this would be C sharp, this would be D sharp, and then this would be E sharp and not F, which is kind of funny. It's technically correct, but generally we'd rather call this note F instead of E sharp because it's just less confusing. And then same thing if we kept going, this would be F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp instead of C. Again, we'd rather call this note C instead of B sharp. The other scale I want to mention very briefly is the minor scale, also known as the natural minor scale. And that's very simply the same as the major scale, just starting on a different note. So instead of starting on C for a C major scale, we can use these same notes, but just starting 2 notes down from there, starting on A. So if we go ahead and play from A to A, that is a minor scale. And that has a much sadder and darker tone to it as opposed to the happy and joyful major scale. Now, just like the major scale, we can take that pattern of half steps and play it anywhere on the keyboard to get the minor scale in a different key. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the half steps are for the minor scale. And starting from A, we can see that our pattern of half steps going up is 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2. And that's our pattern that we can use to play a minor scale anywhere on the keyboard. So if I go ahead and use that pattern starting on a different note, let's say E flat, I'll now be able to play an E flat minor scale. Now, because the notes in a minor scale use the same notes as a different major scale, we can actually call these two keys relative. So if we take a look at all those white keys between C and C as the C major scale, we know that all those same keys are the ones from the A minor scale. So those two keys are what we call relative. C major is the relative major key of A minor, and vice versa, A minor is the relative minor key of C major. Now there's a lot of other scales that we could talk about that have very different sounds than the major and the minor scale, but there's 2 in particular that I want to mention. And that's because they have this same relationship that the major scale and the minor scale have, which is that they contain the same notes, they just start on a different note. And that is the pentatonic scale. In the case of the pentatonic scale, penta means 5, and that's because this scale only has 5 notes as opposed to the 7 notes of the major scale and the minor scale. And these are just 5 notes that are taken out of the major scales and minor scales that sound good together. And I'll go ahead and show you starting on C, the major pentatonic scale. So starting on C, we have C, D, E, G, and A. And we can see that's the same as the C major scale. All we did was remove the F and the B. And again, we can break this down into a pattern of half steps that we can apply anywhere on the keyboard. So starting from C, we can see that the half steps are 2, 2, 3, 2, and then 3. So again, I can take this pattern and I can play it anywhere on the keyboard. I'll start on E flat. I'll go 2, 2, 3, 2, 3. And then, as you may have guessed by now, the minor pentatonic scale is the same notes as the major pentatonic, just starting on the relative minor. So instead of C major pentatonic, we can start on A, play the same notes, and we'll have a minor pentatonic. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pattern of half steps of the minor pentatonic scale. So starting on A, we have 3, 2, 2, 3, and 2. And again, we can take this pattern and play it anywhere on the keyboard. So starting on F, we have 3, 2, 2, 3, 2. And these two scales, just like the major scale and the minor scale, are extremely common across many different genres of music, and you'll hear them used quite often. Now, when you're first starting to learn how to play scales on an instrument, it can be really useful to go ahead and memorize these half-step patterns, or at least have them written down somewhere so you can reference them easily. But over time, you'll eventually just start memorizing how to play these different scales across your instrument, and you won't have to think about these half-step patterns at all. These are just useful at first when we're first starting to learn about scales. So now that we have a solid understanding of the basic scales used in most music, let's start talking about chords. Now, chords are just a group of notes that we play together at the same time that sound good together. And the most basic type of chord that we can play is what's called a triad. And that's because it has 3 different notes in it, and we'll play all 3 notes at the same time. Now, the way that we can figure out how to play triads is by using the major scale. Now, whenever we pick a note out of the major scale that we want to play a triad based off of, we're going to go ahead and play notes in that scale, but we're going to skip some notes. So starting on any given note in a major scale, say we're using the C major scale, and we start on C, we want to play the first, third, and fifth note from that C. So the first note is being the C itself. The third note is this E, we're going to skip the D. And then the fifth note is the G, we're going to skip the F. And this pattern of skipping these notes here is something that we can use across the entire major scale to create a triad based on every note in that major scale. So if we're going to go ahead and play a D triad here, we'll start on D, we'll skip E, and we'll go to F, we'll skip G, and we'll go to A. And this is a pattern that we can keep doing up and down the major scale, which luckily in the key of C, they're all white keys, so we can use the same shape all the way up and down. Now you'll notice that all of those sounded good together, but they did sound different. Not every triad sounded the same. Some of them sounded happy, some of them sounded a little sad, and some of them sounded a little dissonant is what we would call it. And dissonant just means that it sounds unresolved to our ears. It doesn't sound settled and neutral. It sounds like it wants to go to some type of chord after that. Now, the reason that those triads sounded different is because if we go through the different triads and we take a look at the number of half steps in between the different notes within the triad, we'll notice that there's a different pattern of half steps for the different triads. So if we start on C, we'll notice that our pattern is 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, and then 1, 2, 3 half steps. So 4 half steps and 3 half steps gives us what we call a major triad. And similar to a major scale, it's a nice, happy, pleasing sound. If we go up to D and we do the same thing, we'll notice that the pattern's changed a bit. It's going 1, 2, 3 half steps, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps. And you can hear that this triad has a bit of a sadder sound. This is what we call a minor triad, similar to the minor scale. And as we go back to the major scale and we keep going up, we can see that we have an E minor triad, an F major triad, a G major triad, A minor triad, and then this one is a little bit different. We can see that we have 1, 2, 3 half steps, and then 1, 2, 3 half steps. This is a diminished triad, and this is a very unresolved sounding chord. It sounds like something wants to happen immediately after this. And we can hear that the C major triad resolves that B diminished triad really nicely. There is one other type of triad that's worth mentioning that doesn't fall within the major scale, and if we take a major triad and we move the top note up by a half step, this is what's called an augmented triad, which again, it's another dissonant triad that we want to resolve to something. And it doesn't fall within the major scale, but it is worth knowing about because you will come across it at times. And again, just like our scales are patterns that we can use starting on any note, same with our triads. We can use these triad patterns starting on any note to create a triad. So say I wanted to create an E flat major triad. I know that pattern is 4 half steps and then 3 half steps. So I start on E flat and then I go up 4 half steps and then 3 half steps. So I know that that's an E flat major triad. Now let's say I wanted to do a C sharp minor triad. I know that that pattern is 3 half steps and then 4 half steps. So if I start on C sharp, go up 3, and then I go up 4, that's my C sharp minor triad. Now from here we can start taking these chords and playing them together back to back to create chord progressions. And a chord progression is simply just a series of chords that sound nice together, and we often want to repeat and keep playing again and again. And the way we can create a chord progression using these triads is by just simply taking triads out of one single major key and figuring out a pattern that sounds good. Now if I go ahead and start on a C major triad, maybe I'll jump up to an F major triad. And then from here, maybe I'll go back down to a D minor triad. And then from here, I'll go up to a G major triad. And then I'll just play the whole thing again. And we can continue simply just exploring different triads and different chords and different keys and see what sounds good together. But there are a couple of guidelines for chord progressions that can really help us create something that sounds good much easier than simply just playing random things and seeing if it works. And that is the concept of a key. Now, the chord progression I played was all using the C major scale, and we would say that this chord progression was in the key of C. It used notes out of C major, but more importantly, it used this C major triad as sort of a home or a base, or what we would call a root of the chord progression. And the other chords that I played sounded somewhat like they wanted to go somewhere. They wanted to progress from that chord onto another chord. And in particular, we often talk about the dominant chord, which is the 5 chord. And if we start from C going up to 5, it's this G chord. In the key of C, this is a chord that very much wants to go somewhere, do something else. It wants to move on to the next chord. And we often think of this motion of going from the 5 chord to the 1 chord as being a strong resolution. This 5 very much wants to go to that 1 chord. And we start using these names 5 and 1 instead of G and C because we're referring to these chords within a key. So this progression of 5 to 1, we can apply to any key, and it will always be 5 and then 1. Now, there are many other common chord progressions that you'll see in all kinds of different music, and this progression of the 5 chord to the 1 chord is probably the most basic and common, but I do want to cover a few others that you'll see pretty often as well. So if we start on C major, we can go up to the 4 chord, which would be F major, and then simply go right back to the 1 chord, the C major. And this F doesn't sound quite as unresolved as the G does, but it does give us something different to go back and forth between using the 1 chord and the 4 chord. We can string these two progressions together as well to go from C to the 4 chord F to the 5 chord G, and then back to 1. Another chord we can use instead of the 4 chord is actually the 2 chord, and you'll notice that there's 2 similar notes in both of those chords, F and A. So if we go C to the 2 chord, D minor, to the 5 chord, G, and then to the 1 chord. Very similar sound, very useful too. Another chord that we can sneak into that chord progression would be this A minor, which is not too different than the C major sound. You'll see that C major is C, E, G, and A minor is A, C, E. Again, there's 2 shared notes there. So if we go C, the 1 chord, down to A minor, the 6 chord, up to D minor, the 2 chord, and then we can play the G up here or the 1 down here, the 5 chord, and then back to C. Now we're getting into a 4 chord long progression that's used in all kinds of different music and likely sounds quite familiar to your ears. But really, this is just the very beginning of creating chord progressions, and it's really an endless world of different chords, especially once you start using chords from different keys. There's essentially infinite possibilities of chord progressions that we can come up with. Now, there is one other chord progression that I want to mention, and that's because we have to use a slightly different scale from what we've already covered to achieve this chord progression. And that's going to be when we start using minor keys. So if we start using A minor to create chord progressions instead of C major, there's one note that we can change that creates a very common chord progression that is going to sound very familiar to our ears. So taking this concept of the 1 chord and the 5 chord being the basis for a lot of progressions, We can apply this to minor as well using the 1 chord, A minor, but when we go to the 5 chord, we're going to change one note. So instead of playing E minor up here, we're going to play E major, and we're going to borrow this G sharp. And that's because this major 5 chord, again, has that pull towards the root. Even though in this case we're playing a minor key, we can still use a major triad on that 5 chord to get that pull towards the root. And this G sharp comes from a different scale than the natural minor scale that we initially talked about. This comes from what we call the harmonic minor scale. So if we go ahead and play that A minor scale, but we use G sharp instead of G, you'll see it sounds like this. And you can hear it sort of has a bit of a spooky, haunted sound. And if we were going to go ahead and look at the pattern of half steps for this scale, it would be 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, and then 3 and 1. So this jump of 3 half steps is a bit different than our major scale and our natural minor scale. And the reason it is there is often so we can get that 5 chord in a major triad sound, in order to get that chord progression of 5 to 1, where that 5 is really pulling towards that 1 chord. So now that we've covered the basics of chord progressions and triads, I want to talk very briefly just about other chords and other chord voicings, because there's a lot more that we can do than just these basic triad chords. And we can start seeing and hearing those chords if we take this pattern that we've been using to create triads, which is taking the notes from a scale and skipping notes. If we simply keep going, this is what's called a 7th chord, and that's because we're using the 7th note of the C major scale to create the chord. And this is what we call a major 7 chord. And from here, just like triads, we can take that pattern and continue playing it up the scale as well. And just like triads, we have some 7th chords that don't quite fall within the major scale as well. The chords that do fall within it are that major 7 chord, which also falls on the F, the 4 chord here. We have a minor 7 chord, which also falls on the E, the 3rd, and A, the 6th. We have a dominant 7 chord. And this, similar to when we play the triad, has that pull towards the 1 chord, that unresolved sound. That sounds great when we play the 1 chord after it. And then on the 7th 7 chord here, we have a fully diminished chord. And then on top of that, we can even go past 7th chords and get into further extensions up if we just keep using this pattern of skipping a note within a scale. So there are really many different types of chords that we can use in music, but what's also equally important to that is how we voice the chords. And voicing simply means just where we choose to play the notes of a chord on the keyboard. Now, up till now, I've just been playing the notes as they are, going straight up from the first starting note and playing the notes right after that, but we don't necessarily have to do that when we're playing notes. So if we take this C major triad and we have C, E, and G, we can play these notes in different places, including repeating the notes. So let's just say I want to put the C down here, and I'll play this G, but then I'll play the E up here. You can hear it's the same sound as this chord, but it's much fuller and broader because we're spreading the notes out a bit. From here, we can even start to repeat some of these notes to get an even wider sound. You can see I'm playing C, G, C, E, G, C. So I'm playing C 3 times, and I'm playing G twice. But it's all just part of that C major triad. I'm just playing more notes and I'm spreading them out a bit. I could also choose to play the root of the triad, the C, down here, and play the rest of the triad up here. Or here. Or here. So you can see that there are many different ways to play a chord, and how you choose to play a chord may depend on the sound that you want from that chord, but it also may depend on how you're voicing the chord before it or after it. So let's say I am playing that C up here, and I want to play that 5 chord, that G. I want to do that common chord progression of 1 to 5. So I might keep the root of the triad down here, but since I was playing these 3 notes to play the C major triad, maybe I'll keep the G where it is, and I'll move the C down to B, and I'll move the E down to D. That created a really nice smooth transition between those 2 chords, and we can use transitions like that across entire chord progressions to create some really nice music. The last topic I want to touch on very briefly is improvisation, and that's because when you're learning about music theory and learning to play an instrument, improvisation is one of the most fun ways that you can get familiar with your instrument and familiar with these sounds that we learn about in music theory. And improvisation is really all about just exploring the different sounds of these chords and these scales, and the best way to get started is simply by picking one of these scales and playing some notes in it. So let's say I picked that C major pentatonic scale and I simply just started playing some notes in it. That's improvisation. I didn't really decide what I was going to play before I started playing it, and I just tried something. So let's say I want to play a basic chord progression to go along with these notes. In the key of C major, let's say I pick 1, 4, 5, 1, which would be C, F, G, C. And maybe I'll voice these so I don't have to move across and take up some of my right hand space. So I'll go ahead and voice them like this. And then I'll go ahead and add those right hand notes back in. That's a really simple way to start to get the sound of these chords and these scales into your ears and under your fingers. And improvisation is a skill that you can build up over the course of your life and really enjoy using no matter what instrument you play, whether it's a keyboard or a guitar or a single note instrument, or even if you sing. Improvisation is a wonderful part of singing. And if you made it this far into the video, I want to go ahead and congratulate you. This was quite a bit of material, and I would suggest you try not to feel overwhelmed when you're learning these basics. It can take a little bit of time to internalize these things. And once you do, there's a bunch more music theory waiting for you to learn that is also equally exciting and interesting and can help you progress with learning your instrument and learning how to improvise, learning how to write music, learning how to produce music, or just simply enjoying the music theory itself. If there are any other music theory concepts you want me to cover, please let me know down in the comments, and please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Later.